I'm happy to introduce these two brothers because in very rare spaces do Black men get access to be transparent, to be vulnerable, and to be impactful. And I'm so happy to share the platform to introduce these two brothers today. First, okay, so I'm excited about them, and then I'm about to go see Beyonce in an hour, so I'm excited about so many different things. So shout out to our women too. So Ben McBride is a visionary leader of a radical belonging, the co-founder of Empower Initiative, a capacity building develop about empowering organizations and community. He is a sought after speaker, peacemaker, and faith leader. Ben's decade-long commitment to ending gun violence includes being the founder of Bring the Heat campaign, a national initiative to transform policy, as well as former director of, I believe it's PICO, California, the state's largest religious social change network. While the impact of his passion strives through bringing in belonging is featured in the Sundance award-winning documentary, The Force. Ben has also authored Troubling in the Water, which y'all here for today. Ben lends his own voice to the movement. He lives in Oakland with his wife and partner and his 3 amazing daughters. And as for our brother, who will be interviewing him today, Marcus Harris Green needs no introduction to community. When we talk about brothers, when we talk about the tree of community, he is a part of that strong branch that advocates to not only protect and build community through messaging, but creating stories that has helped save my life. So without further ado, give it up for Dr. Ben, and Reverend Ben, excuse me, I need to go to church, and Marcus Harris Green.
Brother Ben, thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, I want to say the last time I think we were together, I was on one of your workshops over in Alabama. It took us through Montgomery. Obviously, you needed to stay in Montgomery and do some healing work as well with
hanging out by the boats.
Yeah, right in the boats.
Okay.
But that brings me to my question of, in this day and age now, we live in a hyper polarized times. It seems like we vault from outrage to outrage online and sometimes in person. Many times we can't agree on the time of day, let alone reality and history and truth. So why put your energy and effort into this work? I mean, I know some people say that it's the fool's errand. So why embark on this work?
Well, I think that time dictates the strategies and the activities that we've got to be involved in. And that the only reason you and I are sitting here having a conversation in Seattle is because enslaved African women particularly thought about engaging in some radical kind of survival and engagement and practice under the oppression of slavery without any proof that the country would ever abolish slavery. But they began to behave in ways that actually had no proof that what they were striving for would ever manifest. Many at that time, I think, would say that the idea of an American society without slavery was a fool's errand. But they believed in who we could become, so much to the point that they began to behave in ways that gave birth to the present that we have. And so when I think about the moment that we're in right now, and a moment where, you know, the lethal mass partisanship study said in 2019, 18% of Republicans said they feel the country will be better if the majority of the Democrats just die. And 22% of Democrats said they felt the country would be better if the majority of the Republicans just die. Nobody's saying who kills them or how they die, but 1 out of 5 people in our major political parties are saying that genocide is the way forward. Suggests to me that this is actually one of the most critical conversations we need to be having.
Absolutely. I want to ask you this question because it was posed to me when I was coming over here. You obviously are somebody whose background, you grew up in the church, you are, you a pastor, reverend. Seattle is known as a very unchurched place, and I can tell that you were a reverend because you was already sweating, it was dripping and pouring.
And I have a preacher's towel, in case you didn't.
But,
Two things to be certain: if you're black and from the church, you keep a towel with you. But go ahead.
but this individual who I had this conversation with, they've had a very bad experience with the church in terms of being excluded. And so for you though, how are you able to practice a faith that is expansive and includes as opposed to exclude, particularly as it relates in this day and time when there's so much is viewed as Christianity that comes from the religious right, when there are, Christianity, like anything else, is not a monoculture. So how are you able to bridge build with folks in the secular community as well?
Yeah, well, I think religion has contributed to a lot of the problems that we're dealing with right now. A lot of the othering, the hegemony, the supremacy, the imperialism has a lot of its roots in religion, particularly Christianity, and so does the resistance work. So we have this kind of dynamic where from these origin stories, whether it's religion, political ideology, there's these, the question is, what road will we choose from them? And we have the opportunity to actually remake these religious practices for those who identify that way, to remake our political ideologies for folks who find homes in that way, to even think about, for those that identify with humanism, in what way do we want to think about how humanism invites us to create a wider circle of human concern? And so the sense that I have is the euphemism that comes up for me is what my dad used to say back in the South. Black people in the South called the boogeyman the booger bear. I don't know if any of y'all ever heard of that, but to me, the boogeyman, the booger bear, is not Christianity, certainly is not Islam, it's not Judaism, it's us and how we orient ourselves towards these ideologies. Are we going to use these stories to widen the circle? Are we going to continue to allow them to perpetuate a smaller circle? I think it has a lot to do with how we practice these traditions and how we leverage them to be in service to where it is that we want to go, rather than only continuing to calcify where we've been.
Right. Well, now, in reading your book and knowing more about you, you have this definition of belonging that does not, you say, there's not a race difference, and nor does it, I want to say, try to invite, color blindness and sameness and so forth. So for you, can you open up the book with this great story about this, I want to say that he was an unhoused man that was sitting on your porch when you came home from a long day. Yeah. And he was not invited.
Nope.
And you were like, come on, brother, can you, get on off the porch?
Please get off my porch, because my wife keeps having intense fellowships with me every day about you sitting on my porch. Right.
And as a pastor, you was about to lay some hands. You was about to lay the mitts on him.
Different kinds of hands, but some hands, yes.
But you actually stopped and you struck up a conversation with the man. And can you tell a little bit about that story? Because I thought it very much illustrated, this concept of belonging that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that became real for me in the middle of that story was the reality that the idea of belonging at times feels very esoteric, right? It's hard to define. Some could even say it feels pretty mushy. But to me, belonging is something that's so core to what we need as human beings that we have to define it. And we've got to really think about how we do it in proximity to other people, particularly because what I found over the course of time is if people are not offered healthy places and ways to belong, they will choose unhealthy places and ways to belong because the need for belonging is so core. But that day when I came home from doing the work, the brother was camped out on the stairs, and my whole orientation towards the story is, this is my house. I own it. A lot of my consciousness being informed by capitalism and land owning and all of these orientations that I've grown up in. This is my house. I need you to move. You're disrupting my status quo. Until the brother stopped and he told me, after I was willing to pause, he said, no disrespect, but this is the house I grew up in. And he said, I recognize that you own the house now, but I was raised here. And my mother is passed, and I come back to this house not out of disrespect to you or to your wife, but he said something that stayed with me that day. He said, this is the place where I belong. And the idea of belonging became very challenging to me because it wasn't easy for me to say, well, I belong here because I own the house, because right now the story has me here. Belonging to me meant that I was going to have a much more expansive definition of belonging that doesn't just include my story and when I showed up to the neighborhood, but actually includes his story and holds the fact that all of our stories are colliding into one another. And if the way we think about belonging is, I'm just going to segregate myself from people who are different, or I'm going to start the story of belonging where it makes sense for me and exclude others, we're going to continue to, live in the cycles of violence. So to me, the idea of belonging that I experienced with that brother was, I needed to pause and allow his story to help expand my own. Widen my circle and recognize that while I have the right to make him get off the stairs, belonging doesn't ask me what I have the right to do. Belonging actually asks me what is right to do. And how do I think about creating a story that holds his story on the stairs as well as my own?
Yeah, just let that sink in for a bit. That means that you do write in the book that belonging doesn't mean that you are inviting abuse upon you.
At all.
You say that, and I believe I'm quoting correctly, you say that belonging can't, essentially be a mechanism by which, people abuse and oppress you, and that you don't necessarily have to be in proximity with those folks who view you as their enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, and still, you still have to hold them in a space of human concern.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you this, how in the world can you do that?
Yeah. I'll tell you how it worked its way in me, because it wasn't something that I chose. It was actually a moment that found me, and many moments that found me that pushed me into that. And this is the question I feel like I get more from, those of us, if you haven't figured that out already. For me, you probably pick it up from reading the book. My politics are on the left.
I did not notice.
You didn't pick that up. All right. All that going to jail and protesting, well, that is kind of a right wing thing now, for different reasons. But, there's been a lot of questions, I think, and rightly so, from folks on the left that are saying, well, what are you really calling us to do? Why should we be a part of shaping a world that includes those who participate in our oppression in our circle of human concern? And for me, what I say that shaped me was, what pushed this inside me was my work doing gun violence prevention. Because when I was engaged in that work, there were mothers who were losing their children to gun violence, who were rightly saying that the loved ones who were, and that's what I call the young brothers that have been in the community participating in gun violence. It was coined by a brother named Kevin Grant from Oakland, where I was engaged in doing the work. But one of the things that I had to hold was they were saying these young men that are participating and taking the lives of people in our community don't belong in the circle of human concern. We should lock them up. We should jail them. They took my son. I had to hold mothers in my arms. One mother in particularly in East Oakland lost both of her sons in the process of 21 days, right? One 13, another in his early 20s, right? And they're like, I'm looking at this woman crying. These brothers don't deserve to be here. And at the same time, by me being in relationship with brothers who were caught up in the cycle of gun violence, I realized that the conversation wasn't that simple. And so it wasn't that I needed to quiet or disappear the pain of the mothers who had been impacted by gun violence, but I had to think about how to serve as a bridge in that story that helped to ensure that their needs were in the circle of human concern, and at the same time recognize that the brothers who were participating in the gun violence needs also needed to be in the circle of human concern. And the more that conversation widened, then the conversation about policing came in. And some folks said, well, policing is a racist institution and we shouldn't care about the human beings that are a part of policing, until I got in deep relationship with a black brother who subsequently became the chief of police in the city of Oakland for a time. And he talked about the first young man who was ever killed on a high school campus was his brother. And the reason he got into policing was because he was a victim of trauma and violence himself. And so what it taught me was that we got to have a circle that's big enough, and some of us are going to have to serve as a bridge. Everybody doesn't have to do the same thing. Everybody needs to do something. And even if we think about a wide circle of human concern, it doesn't mean we all need to be proximate to each other. Because my get down is there's some people who their beliefs, the way that they want to live life, is so different and toxic and harmful to mine that I want to be on the opposite side of the circle of human concern as them. But I want to ensure that the circle is wide enough to include even them. Because the moment that I say that the price for inclusion for me is exclusion for them, I feel I have now allowed empire to make me into its own image. And now I've become another agent of empire with a different story. And I feel that if we're to get to liberation, liberation can't be for black folks to become the new white folks, for gay folks to become the new straight folks, for women to become the new men. There has to be an idea that we have as human beings, that we have an ability to be more than just primates that run around and fight for who gets to be in charge.
I mean, so that does, for me at least, that conjures up that saying by Audre Lorde, right? That you can't, what is it that you can't?
Dismantle.
Yeah, dismantle.
The master's house.
The master's house with the master's tools, right? Mm-hmm. And it isn't just material, right, of concern. It's also psychological concern as well. And I want to ask you, I want to stay on that topic of when you were doing some of your work with the ceasefire work and the gun violence, because another story that I thought was very instructive, you said that there was a young man who you were talking to, and you were trying to get him to put down his guns. Mm-hmm. And you go through this nice, elaborate conversation, and he responds back with a question.
Yeah, he did.
And he says, are you asking me to put down this gun for me? Or are you asking me to put down this gun for you? And I thought about that today. I was at the barber shop getting my hair cut. That's why I was looking so clean.
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
But there's a young man who's in there quite often, and I surmise that he is a retailer of urban pharmaceuticals, shall we say.
Okay. All right. Street pharmacist.
Yeah, there you go.
All right.
And so often, the barber's asking him, like, man, can't you see that you're destroying, this community? And he's like, well, what job is there for me? What, are you gonna hire me? Or like, what is there for me? And so I know those are questions that I know people in our city face all the time, in terms of like, how do we actually stand in relationship with somebody who is, causing harm to a community?
Yeah, this is why I think bridging is so critical. Like, I actually don't, let me say it this way. Bridging is not a panacea, right? But it's critical to our work because, I've been saying for years, you can't help anybody you're afraid of. And the only way to challenge the fear you have of people and the narratives that have been told to you about people is to be in relationship with people. And, the sense that I have is it's easy to other someone when you're not proximate to them. It's easy to believe, the narratives that are on social media, things that are put to us on the news. But to get proximate with people, the thing that really changed me about it was to recognize that our loved ones that are involved in gun violence, community violence, underground economic efforts aren't absent of an analysis, a political analysis, an economic analysis. Oftentimes what I say is the loved ones in the community are the most American people there are, because they are committed to materialism, resources at all costs, nativism, they belong to the people that they're connected to, and militarism. They used force in order to protect nativism and materialism, which Dr. King said were the triplets in the 1960s that were going to destroy this country. So when I look at the young brother that's on the block, he is not the problem in America. He is America. And I think sometimes we other them because to look at them is to look in the mirror. It's just we dress ours up with Audi foreign cars and suits and bow ties and nice venues like this, but they operate in a way that is American without all of the fluff. And so one of the things that I've had to find was I had to learn how to recognize these young brothers, young sisters were not dumb. They had a perspective, and that if I was going to if I really cared about safety that included them, a circle of human concern that included them, I had to answer their questions about their safety, not mine. And one of the things I realized in my story in the beginning, I thought I was really committed to their safety. But it took years for me to recognize that I was on a journey of my own becoming, that I was in process, moving from kind of a salvific mindset that I had about who I could be in the community and be a Batman that could come in and help the community be safe. And then to recognize along the journey that I myself was an agent of violence to many of the young people in the community themselves by my lack of being engaged with them. And that by getting in relationship with them, they could tell me the solutions that needed to happen. They still need to happen. We've still got lots of problems, but I think the challenges we have in our world aren't ones we're going to solve in 20 years. We're not going to solve them in mayoral cycles. We're not going to solve them in annual city budgets. It's going to be deep commitment over decades for us to undo the monstrosity of othering that has happened in this country over the last 500 years.
Well, I want to ask you, because you brought up, whether in schools or municipalities and so forth, and I see a lot of people in the audience who work in institutions that I know in off the record conversations, shall we say, that people hold tension of, okay, I'm here in this institution, and yet I, still have to answer to the community while existing in this institution that may or may not historically have done damage to, to a community. And I want to bring up the example you talked about, how there was tension when you were doing some of the ceasefire work, and you were working with police in the Oakland Police Department, and there were some folks who were calling you sellout, Uncle Tom, such and such, and that the work though itself, it ended up actually causing a major decrease in police-involved shootings, or police-involved killings. I want to say Oakland, for a 20-year span, was averaging like 6 police-involved killings for, per year.
One every 6 weeks for 20 years.
Right. And you stepped in, I mean, not just you.
Correct.
But, the community of folks that you were with stepped in, and I want to say it was 4 out of 5 years, there were 0.
No officer-involved killings. We're at the same time, over that same period of 5 years, with maybe 1 year difference, we reduced gun-related homicides by 50%. We reduced officer injury, uses of force, complaints against officers. We did all of it without hiring more police. And what to me that has been somewhat of a testament to is that because of the institutions we have, I challenge us, and I think I try to make this challenge in the book, to think that we're going to be able to create a wide circle from the back corner of our affinity group. The invitation that I'm offering is that we actually need to outline a new space that I'm liking to call the radical middle. That I hold space at the middle, not because I don't have a perspective, but actually because I do. I occupy space at the middle to try to engage with an institution that has a history in being a racist institution, and many of us would argue still actively operates institutionally in very racist ways, while at the same time recognizing that the human beings inside these institutions, some may be racist, but many may not be. And how do I take the opportunity to bridge with those who I can just like a real bridge. You can't build one everywhere with people. You can't bridge with everyone. But just because you can't bridge with some people doesn't mean you can't bridge with others. And my, thought is that the institutions we have are not going away tomorrow. And so my question, particularly speaking from somebody that is a part of a subordinated, marginalized group historically in this country, is how do we redeem as much as we can the institutions we have: city government, local police departments, health departments, religious institutions, social change organizations. Let's redeem these institutions to help us widen the circle while we also reimagine and co-create the new institutions we want going forward. But the idea that somehow we're going to land the whole plane, stop everything, build a whole new world, and then get that thing up into the ground, I think that is a fool's errand.
Well, now, I mean, you talk about bridging, obviously, but I forgot who said it, but they said bridges are made to be walked on.
Bell hooks.
There you go. So you also say that sometimes you need to break before you can bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, to me, it lives in the space that bridging requires. The way I define bridging is that it's not about agreement and it's not about affirmation. It's about acknowledgement of different points of view and perspective. And as irrational as some perspectives and points of view can be, they are held by people, right? And, people tell me all the time, I can't believe you sit at the table with this person as irrational as they are. And particularly when Christians say this to me, I say, you believe a dead person came back to life. I mean, that's pretty irrational. So, I mean, if you can believe a dead Palestinian Jew came back from the dead and floated up into the clouds, I think you can believe some pretty irrational things. That's not a very rational thought. I'm not trying to be harmful to anybody. I'm also leaning to these irrational ideas, right? So the invitation is to say that bridging is about us holding it and recognizing you have this point of view. And what I want to figure out is how do we bring all of your perspective, all of mine, as much as we can, identify where we can't move forward, but also identify where we can. And there's moments where we're going to recognize in that effort to bridge, you and I cannot go forward. We're going to have to break because we can't move forward. My invitation, though, when we can't move forward, is to at least have a commitment. And this is where I'm lifting up this idea of a new social contract, which is what I think we need in society. What is our social contract that says what happens when we can't bridge? How do we get committed to a new social contract where violence and genocide is off the table when we actually can't be in relationship with one another and bridge across our difference? I think as we move towards 2044, which is going to be the first time that folks known as white in this country are going to be the minority, a lot of the sociologists and anthropologists are saying that hate crimes and domestic terrorism are going to continue to rise. Some of the arguments have been that there are some people identifying as white who don't know where they belong in this new story of the country as it's progressing. And so I do think that there's an opportunity for us to bridge, not just with white folks, but I think black folks need to bridge inside our spaces. I think those of us that are citizens need to bridge with folks that are immigrants. I think men need to be doing more bridging work with women and our LGBTQ plus relatives. I think there's a lot of bridging work that needs to happen because we're not living in that easy black and white world of the 1950s. We're living in a very different pluralistic world, and I think we've got to find ways to bridge. Breaking is going to happen. I'm trying to inspire us to think about looking for opportunities to bridge.
You talk about the necessity for a new social contract, but what about a new social narrative, if you will,
Yeah.
right? Particularly in this country. I mean, you talk about how it's that whenever we try to expand who we are in this society, there's usually a lot of fear that's attached to it, right? I mean, as you mentioned, as the quote unquote the browning of America goes on, there's fear, there's an uptick in hate crimes, an uptick in white radical extremism. We've seen that with the various mass shootings that have gone on. So how do we get to a point where that expansion isn't looked at it as an us versus them narrative?
Yeah. I don't think we can do it in big meta strategies. I think we actually have to do it small and local and focused. I think the way that we engage that conversation are through public and cultural institutions. We have to start the conversation, the bridging work, where people are already gathering. This idea that we are going to create a new social contract and that the government somehow is going to rain it down on us across the country. I don't know if anybody's been a student of history, but I don't think that anything incredibly great has come out in those kinds of ways. But I do think organizations in the context of city and neighborhoods can think about what is a new social contract for us in this place where we live, work, and play. What are new agreements that businesses can make with the public sector and make with community-based organizations and neighbors, both those who are housed and those who are unhoused, to begin to say, what can we do in this 4-block radius or in this 8-block radius around how we will behave and how we will come to decisions and how we will co-create and who's going to hold space for that and who's going to resource that and who's going to hold that accountable. I don't think we have the institutions right now to do that. I don't think we have the story to do that. And so I've also been wondering, what's the new story that we need to start building? Because it's all about story to me. I mean, if you just trip, right? Somebody somewhere told us all, usually when we were kids, that if you walked between the white painted lines on the concrete outside, you would not get hit by a vehicle. Now, nothing in physics says that because you walk between those white lines, the car will not run you over. And many of us have actually seen cars hit people in the crosswalk. And yet, we continue to step into the crosswalk. Why? Because of the story. We've got to go somewhere. And the story was often given to us by someone we trusted about how to navigate the world. I think we need new stories about how we navigate this new world. There's a new world emerging among us. And right now, I think the stories that we have are the stories that were birthed from colonizers, imperialists. I don't want to just become the new person who gets to dominate others, but I need a new story. And so that's why I'm hoping in this story, we can find a way to handle our conflict through calling each other in versus calling each other out. Finding ways to widen the circle and lean into deep understanding rather than looking for opportunities for me to be able to have a gotcha moment. I tell folks in the movement, as much as we say we don't like the police, we sure know how to police, right? You say something I don't like, woo, woo. I pull up, put you in cuffs, and I roll you off. So I think the invitation for us is going to be, how do we start engaging in that work? And I think it's got to be local. We're not going to be able to do it with everyone, but we're going to have to do it with those that are willing to be a part of the experiment.
Now, you bring up another story in the book when it comes to belonging and trying to bridge and trying to call folks in, where, for those who don't know, you were actually fired from your first 2 pastoral jobs.
I was.
And you were fired from one because you confronted the head minister, who at the time was sexually harassing some of the young folks in the congregation. And you brought it to the person's attention. And he basically said that he would do everything that he could to destroy you, and it cost you
yes, it did.
your career. So how do we go how do we get to that point where we know that we can summon the courage, right, to do the work that needs to be done, even when we know it comes with consequence?
You just made me take a real deep breath because, whenever I hear these stories, the trauma still lives in my body, right? About those moments. There's nothing like having to go home and tell your wife and my daughter now, who's 23, but at the time she was 1, that you just got fired because you tried to do the right thing, right? I don't know that there's any way for me to disappear risk. If we're going to create the world we need, the one we deserve instead of the one we think we can get, it means that some of us are going to have to be willing to risk privilege, comfort, Sometimes it's going to work out for you, and other times it's not going to work out for you. Sometimes we're going to get it right, sometimes we're going to get it wrong. But I do think where risk is a part of it, and I think one of the things that helps the status quo maintain itself is the risk aversion that we have in our culture. That, I only want to engage in the work that needs to be done if I'm confident that those around me are going to affirm my participation. But when I think about a great example like in Florida with somebody like Desmond Meade, formerly incarcerated brother, when I met Desmond in 2013, we were at the DC March, the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, and Desmond's walking around with all these clipboards underneath his arm. And I was like, D, what you doing? We were organizing the same network, and he said, I'm gonna restore the right to vote for 1.4 Floridians in Florida. And I said, you gonna restore the right to vote? I am. This brother is walking around the March on Washington 50th anniversary, sweating more than I am, with a t-shirt on, asking people, you live in Florida? You live in Florida? You live in Florida? But in 2016, because he bridged with Desmond, is a formerly incarcerated, formerly unhoused brother who, amazing organizer, but he took a risky step and bridged with a white Trump supporting person named Neil Volz, who was also formerly incarcerated, a white brother in Florida. And people were calling Desmond all kinds of things. Why would you work with this guy? He said, because both of us are formerly incarcerated. We both want to restore the right to vote for formerly incarcerated people in Florida. And so when they went into white Southern communities, they carried a conversation about mercy. When they went into the hood and black and brown communities, they carried a conversation about justice. And when Ron DeSantis won the governorship in Florida and Trump won the presidency in 2016, they passed Amendment 4 by over 60% in Florida and restored the right to vote because they were willing to bridge across difference. Desmond took on risk. He got rewarded and became the MacArthur Genius Award and one of Time's most 100 influential people, and everybody celebrates him. But I remember in 2013 when they were calling him a joke. And so the question I am wondering is, are we only going to continue to do things that we know the people in our affinity groups will celebrate, or are we going to start having some real courage and do things that the moment is calling on us? And it may benefit me, it may not. But the question is, and Dr. King said it, a time comes where you can't, ask if it's convenient, if it's politic. Sometimes you got to do some things because it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, go ahead and give him some applause on that. Well, I know we are going to move into our Q&A portion in a bit, but before we do, and seriously, these questions maybe only encapsulate about 5% of your book. It's such a rich and rewarding book and very much worth the read. It'll be out October 24th. Again, get it at an independent bookstore if you can.
Please.
But I do want to ask you, particularly because of the composition of the city that we're in Seattle, you have a criticism of sort of the white moderate that's very similar to Dr. King. When you say so often we're focused on the threat that we can see, if you will, the Stephen Bannons and Proud Boys of the world, and yet oftentimes what is more damaging to movements are folks who have golden intentions, but it soon tarnishes. And can you talk a little bit about that and the importance to not always be the center, if you will, and this and have this sense of saviorism?
Yeah, I think if we're going to get to radical belonging, we don't need people who have access to power and privilege to simply try to figure out how to be cheerleaders for marginalized and subordinated groups of people. We need those people to recognize that not only do they have opportunities to challenge the existing conditions that are causing people to experience real harm, but they also have to grow in their awareness around how they still also contribute to harm for subordinated and marginalized people. And to recognize that just because your politics might be to the left doesn't mean that you don't have major obstruction spots. I think one story I talk about in the book was being at a public safety meeting in East Oakland, and I was there to advocate for more funds, so that we could resource the work that we were doing. And I had a young white brother there who was there to talk about bike lanes. And I remember, Marcus, I was just so upset. I was like, I'm here to talk about gun violence. And this white brother here to talk about bike lanes. But when he was talking about it, he said, I operate in a city that was not designed for a cyclist. And he said, when I'm going down the road, I can hear the loud car coming. I can smell the exhaust from it. I'm not worried about the muscle car and the aggressive driver. He said, the person I'm concerned about is the soccer mom. Because he said the soccer mom has so many good things happening in her car that she's likely to not see me, run me over, then jump out of the car to nurse my wounds. But the fact of the matter is I don't want to get run over. And so I think my call in to white moderates, to folks that feel like, hey, I've got this thing under wraps, is to recognize that just because you know how to say the right words, just because you got the pronouns down, right, just because you got the T-shirt and the flag, doesn't mean that there's not still some way for you to go on your journey. And if I, as a black man, still have a long journey in front of me to deconstruct all the patriarchy and misogyny that is a part of my consciousness because of the world that I grew up in, then I'm encouraging and calling white folks in to say it's not just about voting the right way. It's about being on a long journey, not just to show up as a good, quote unquote, white person, but to really save your soul, if you would, from the taintedness of this American culture, so you can show up in ways that marginalized and subordinated groups really have a degree of safety with you in their presence.
All right. Well, we want to go ahead and open it up for Q&A from the audience.
It seems like you have a lot of experience dealing with really action-based and action item-oriented work. And I have a question about the boring rules and regulation work, the policy and practice work. What's your interface like that, particularly with like rigid institutions like the police department? How is your sort of like bridging been interacted with that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think when we think about institutions, when we think about policy, to me the orientation is to be more than what I like to call a one-trick pony, which is we have to have both a cultural and structural analysis and orientation. When I was doing some of the work with policing, one of the things that I had police leaders tell me is they said, we passed some of the most aggressive reform policies before the George Floyd summer that had happened in the country around racial profiling, use of force, transparency, et cetera. What the police chief kept telling me was, he said, in our work, culture eats structure for breakfast. He said, so if you only work on structure alone and you don't also work on culture, then by the time you change the structure, you pass the law and it gets implemented, we've just found a new way to work around the policy change that you just implemented. A clear example in California, we passed a transparency bill that had to go into effect on a certain day. So on the day before the transparency bill went away, they just shredded all the papers. And so the orientation that I've had is that we need to have something that's not new. I'm actually just trying to hold up things that we've always done in the past: inside, outside strategy, culture and structure, recognizing that you and I don't have to do the same thing. We need to recognize that we both need to be doing some things in order to push this thing along. Now, what I say is when you can't bridge in order to get change, then the only thing left to do is to organize. And so my call to bridging is not to say that we need to stop organizing, that we need to stop being engaged in structural change. What I'm trying to invite us to do is to add a cultural component to that work so that there's an opportunity for it to be more sustainable. And again, it's not going to work in every scenario. I think the notion models are great, and I know we use them in the work across the country, but what worked in Oakland is not going to work in Seattle. What worked in Seattle is not going to work in Chicago. What's worked in Chicago is not going to work in DC. But we can learn from these models. And so my invitation is for us to not just have one orientation where we think we can just pass policies, just do structural change and think that's going to get us where we need to be. I think the problems we face are a little bit more sophisticated than that.
So I have a general question, simple. I know we're talking about bridging, we're talking about what it takes to get the job done, but it seems like there's a step missing. And I know you've hit me with this before. Who do you have to become? What does that look like when you're getting ready to bridge and make that change for community or in the system or somewhere else? Who do you first have to become to be able to be effective in that work?
Yeah. That's one of the statements I say a lot, right? That, the wrong first question is what do we need to do? The right first question is who do we need to become? So I think one of the things that we have to do is think about our own becoming, our own leadership. But what I've told people over and over when they say, so you say the only thing that we're supposed to do is become. I said, that's not what I've said. I said the wrong first question. The right second question is what do we need to do? But I think the invitation that I'm trying to ask us all to say is, how can I show up and be better as a leader where I am? If that's in a community-based organization, how can I lead better? How can I see better? How can I create more space for people that are different? If that's in the public sector, that's in the private sector. If that's in law enforcement, how can I lead better? Because at the end of the day, there are people in these institutions. And so I think, our ability to move the dial has a lot to do with our ability to be on the leadership development journey ourselves. It's not going to happen overnight. I really wish that it could, but my proximity to problems across this country over the last 20 years has taught me that the Desmond Meads, the example I gave, are always in our community. But people are on a journey, and all of us are on a journey. And one of the stories, I know when you were in Alabama and we were there together, I like to talk about often is that Dr. King didn't make himself Dr. King. Now I'm gonna turn you on to a black church just for 5 seconds. Everybody say Joanne Robinson. So Joanne Robinson was the black woman of the Women's Political Council in Montgomery, Alabama, who had been organizing since the 40s to try to desegregate the buses in Montgomery. It was her work that had happened over decades that when the moment came for them to be able to actually change the structure, she recognized that because of sexism, she would not be respected, even though she should have. So she said, we have a young preacher who just took over at my church. We'll make him the spokesperson. He's a 27, 28-year-old young minister. His name's Martin Luther King. We'll tell him what to say and what to do. And because of that, a movement started that has led to the current moment that we have. And so Joanne Robinson was somebody who helped Martin become who he always was meant to be, but he needed that push. I would be inviting us to recognize we could be on either side of that equation. Maybe you need to help push somebody to be a better leader, or maybe you need to accept the push to become a better leader, recognizing that the future that we want is actually accessible. We just don't see it yet.
My wife and I were caught in between a shootout, 35 bullets. You got the police, the young person's face, he was didn't look afraid, he didn't look angry. He's face to face with us, shooting around us. But he had the thrill, it seemed, of the gunfire. Juxtapose that to the police that are where the community is looking for some answers, and all they have is, well, you guys tried to defund us, and this is where we're at. Find me the bridge there.
Find you a bridge. There was a lot in that question and statement for me, right? And so a couple things that I would say, when I first entered the gun violence work, I had a story in myself that informed the way I read what was happening for our young men in community. The way I would read their faces and surmise that there was a thrill happening, or that there was excitement happening, or that they enjoyed being a part of the violence and the pain. It was after time and me becoming a better leader, shaped by their words and experiences, where I recognized that what I saw as a thrill was actually pain, was actually sorrow. It was a cracked heart. It was fear. It was recognizing young men were shooting in the community because the adults had done a poor job of making them feel safe. And so I had to go on a journey to say that even though my eyes are telling me one thing, really, and there's a wonderful book that I encourage you to read called The Four Pivots by Dr. Sean Jenwright. And one of the things he talks about is mirror versus lens as one of the pivots we need to make. We need to move from the lens we have about how we think we see society and move into a mirror and say, why do I see this in the way in which I see it? And so what I found over and over is the young men and women, but it's been the majority of young brothers that are involved in gun violence are not in it because they're thrilled or because they're excited. It's because they're scared. It's because they're hurt. It's because they're afraid. And that what they're looking for is people who aren't afraid of them, people who are willing to get cussed out by them for a little while, traumatized by them for a little while, so that they can actually believe that somebody really gives a damn about them. And I'm the preacher that curses, you know. So, and what I've also found is that law enforcement, if we look at it from a human perspective, the human beings that are in law enforcement, I think have gone through a journey over the last few years that many of them don't feel seen. But what I've told them is y'all are the only people in our society that have the right to take away somebody's life and freedom underneath the law. So you've got to have a higher level of responsibility, because if you can't deal with this, then you got to go find another job. You know, if I have a UPS man and he's traumatized by boxes, he probably shouldn't be a delivery man anymore, right? He should go, you know, sell coffee or something like that, right? But I do think the way that we're going to have to, you know, build a bridge, because these are the people that we have, the institutions we have, is some of us are going to have to go and do the work of spending time in these different affinity groups. And all of us, it's not our mission or purpose to spend time in both of these. And so I'm not inviting us to look for unicorns. I encourage people to, you know, if you've got passion about getting proximate to young people, young adults that are involved in gun violence, go spend your time there. If you feel the invitation to try to go and do bridging work with law enforcement or city officials, go do your work there. If you're feeling a sense to engage in bridging with multiple communities, do your work there. But one of the things I talk about in the book are something I call the 5 A's, which is a journey of formation. First one is awareness. So grow an awareness around what's happening, both around yourself and others. Then move to a place of accountability. Where have I been complicit in the harm, through action or inaction? It's after we've done our awareness work and our accountability work that we can move to articulation, starting to talk about it, advocate. There's the 4th A for others, and then move to activation when we're actually ready to start engaging in the bridging work. My concern is I think too many of us get some awareness and we want to jump immediately into activation and start doing work when we really have not spent enough time in our own leadership development work. And again, the problems that have happened and calcified themselves over the last 500 years in this country aren't going to go away by a cathartic release or a social media post. So I encourage us all to really get busy about the work that we need to do to get engaged in the work that's so critical.
Well, I wish we had more time, but we have a hard out because there's another event right after ours. So, but I do want to finish with one question. And, you know, I'm Unitarian, so it's like, I guess you could say that it's non-practicing agnostics is how I would define it. And so I'm not super well versed on the Bible, but I do believe there is one verse my mom shared with me today. It says that our people perish because of lack of vision. And so I want to ask you, what is a vision? Could you share a vision for a world of belonging? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I think I have my vision for belonging that I want to co-create with others around. But to me, a vision of belonging is a society that is big enough to hold all the people that I agree with, as well as one that can offer humanity, food, shelter, security, and well-being to the people that I also deeply disagree with. I believe if we can have a society that is big enough and has laws created and cultural strategies and physical places for people that I agree with and those that I deeply disagree with to thrive and flourish. To me, that's a society anchored in belonging. I just want to make sure I am living on the side with the people that I like.
Well, all right. Well, yeah. Well, the book is Troubling the Water. Ben McBride, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.